Okay, welcome to MSU Turf Team Update. My name is Kevin Frank. Today's update is June 9th, 2020. Once again, we have Dr. Jeff Andresen with us to give us an update on some of these crazy weather conditions we're experiencing right now and a little bit of the forecast for what's to come in the next week or so. So, Jeff, if you would, go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
I will. And as crazy, the word you used, I think, is fairly fitting. And I'll apologize in advance that there's a lot of material, a lot to cover in this particular briefing. I'm starting with this is an image from the National Weather Service, and it's called their all hazards map, and it looks collectively at well, in this case, all the lower 48. And basically, these are all of the summarized versions of all watches and warnings and advisories and special weather statements. So all the crazy weather, and well, the first thing you see, there are a lot of colors on this map, especially in the middle of the country. And we have everything here from heat advisories to flood warnings to high wind warnings. The area here closest to us, just to our south and actually up into the western part of the lower, that's a potential wind watch or wind advisory. And last but not least, not moving too far to the west, out to the front range, that this little area of darker blue, purple here, that's actually for winter precipitation. They've got snow advisories or winter weather advisories for snow. So we've got just about everything here on the map. And again, I'll try to get to most of it, but I'm going to start with a review here of where we've been for the last week. And in terms of direction, warmer and drier than normal is really a fairly good generalization for the state. Mean temperatures across Michigan for the last week, generally from 1 or 2 degrees above normal in the far north to as much as 6 degrees above normal in the south. And again, that is the third consecutive week of warmer than normal temperatures. And I'll show you the degree day totals. It's definitely been reflected in terms of our development and seasonal accumulations. On the right-hand side, these are our 7-day precipitation totals. Most areas of the state, less than half an inch. And in some spots, including the southwestern lower here, there was no precipitation during the past week. Another week, and I'm going to show you another graphic here just in a second. But one area that's repeatedly missed, and we've talked about this before, again, the southeastern part of the lower peninsula, once again, relative to the rest of the state. In most areas of the state, with this yellow color here, we're really close to the normal, to a couple days actually now ahead. So we've gone from more than 2 calendar weeks behind normal just 3 weeks ago, now to actually a little bit ahead. There's still spots in the northern part of the state, the northern lower and the western upper, where you've got some blue color there, that we're a couple days behind, but nowhere near what we saw here early in the season. So it shows you that we can make up those deficits and or surpluses. Sometimes we see the same thing relatively quickly, but especially the deficits early on when we have our seasonal warm-up kick in. And it really did. We almost went from late spring, early winter, or late winter, early spring to summer, literally within a week or two. But very unusually warm conditions here over the last 3 weeks have really accelerated our degree day accumulations, and of course our also observed phenology, both for vegetation and for insects. I mentioned the area of the state here in the southeast corner. And this is the first time this season we've looked at the Vegetation Drought Response Index. This is a combined index from both satellite and surface observations, and essentially it looks at the temperature of vegetation relative to where it typically is. And the greens here are wetter than normal conditions, where we've got plenty of water for the plants to transpire. And then as you go to the yellow, orange, red, we have more drought. A couple things of note. One is that we did have, you can see, relatively dry conditions up in the far northwestern part of the state, including the Keweenaw. They had significant precipitation following the 7th, so that they actually are a little bit better off than the map would indicate. But just as importantly here, I've mentioned the southeastern corridor down here that has been missed. We're now starting to see some browns and oranges showing up here in this part of the state, and that continues to be the case to the present time. And our topsoils, especially in this area, have become quite dry because the precip has been below normal. They're now going on 6, 7, even 8 weeks in a row. So, and the other part of this equation is the demand. With higher than normal temperatures and with strong sunshine, our relative or our potential evapotranspiration rates, the reference values here is what we use typically to look at. They have been ranging for a lot of the central and southern part of the state at 0.2 to 1/4 inch. And 1/4 inch is pretty much near the upper end of what we expect to see in Michigan, really in any season, certainly in the middle of the growing season. And they've been that way for a solid week plus, in some cases almost 2 weeks. So the demand has really been out there, and it's, again, depleting the topsoil, especially at a relatively rapid rate. Well, looking at where we're headed here, again, I mentioned lots of colors, lots to talk about. And I'm looking here this is a visual satellite map here just over the last hour or so, about 11 o'clock this morning. And there are 2 big weather systems here that will impact us over the next 24 to 48 hours. The first one in this swirl of clouds here is the remnants of Tropical Storm Cristobal. We talked about that last week, and one of these reminders, amazingly, the forecast, the numerical forecast guidance and the models picked that up. We think back a whole week ago, it did a really nice job of where this storm actually ended up. Cristobal made landfall in southern Louisiana here late on Sunday. It was a strong tropical storm. It never really got its act together, but it's the moisture with Cristobal. You can see the swirl of clouds here. This is truly tropical air. It's out of the Caribbean, out of the Gulf of Mexico region, and it's headed north. It's underneath a big upper air ridge. I put that down here just to show you, because what we've got here is an interaction between a truly tropical disturbance. And there's 2 types of low pressure systems, one a tropical origin, and then the other extratropical, which is almost always what we see here in Michigan in the mid latitudes and in the high latitudes. They're closely related, but there's some fundamental differences. And on our weather map today, we've actually got 2 of these, both the tropical and the extratropical versions, literally within a few hundred miles of one another. Because while Cristobal sits and spins here just to our southwest, just to the west of that, you see another mass of clouds out here. That is an extratropical area of low pressure, and it's being driven by this trough, which is moving to the east and south and deepening and strengthening. And a reminder that, well, this is something we would see typically in the cold season. The jet stream typically during the summertime withdraws or contracts northward into Canada. We don't see as much interaction with it as we do in the other seasons. But right now, it looks an awful lot more like late spring than it does early summer. And so this trough here is after Cristobal moves through here over the next 12 to 24 hours. That's the next weather system. So it's going to be a sort of a 1-2 punch. But again, and what will ultimately happen here, I termed this thing or titled it tropical versus extratropical. Well, the tropical cyclone is obviously moving out of tropical areas. It's already in the mid latitudes, and it will become extratropical. And there will be some merger of these 2 systems all the way up into, central Ontario, places like James Bay and Hudson Bay, which is we rarely ever see tropical disturbances here. One other note on that, and that is the track that Cristobal has taken here. Remember, I mentioned it made landfall late Sunday, and then essentially has moved almost due northward up through Arkansas into Missouri, and it will ultimately move through Wisconsin up into the western UP. That is a very, very unusual path for a tropical system. And when we look at the paths of all landfalling tropical cyclones, hurricanes, or tropical storms, are all in the same category. Over the last 100 years, there's only a few that have ever gone this far west. Most of them that make landfall down in the Gulf, even in places like Texas, they end up going through the lower Mississippi Valley, through the southeast, sometimes, of course, through the eastern part of the U.S. We get an occasional visit from one of these every several years or so in Michigan. But for one to go actually up from Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, that is almost unheard of. So very, very unusual. And it has to do with this, again, this upper air jet stream pattern, which is quite unusual, a big ridge here, but it's just something we don't see very often. So on our weather map here, this is from earlier this morning, but it's still pretty close. You can see both of those features are noted here. Here's Cristobal. It's actually now farther north. It's up by about by noon around Kirksville, Missouri, and headed north. And then off to the west here, this is that other elongated area of low pressure with a fairly strong cold front here. And you're going to see the two of these all combined. On the radar pic here down below for the last hour, again, this is late morning and up to around noon, you can see the precipitation associated with Cristobal revolving up counterclockwise up towards the north. And there's also a fair amount of precipitation, including some of the snow and frozen precip I mentioned here further west in that second weather system. For us here in Michigan, a couple things really of note. Today, there's a warm front. One is, you can see down to our south here, the weather map, there's actually a warm front. One of the differences with tropical low pressure systems is they don't have fronts like we do in the mid latitudes. But this one actually does. And the only reason it's there is because it marks the leading edge of that really tropical air mass that Cristobal formed in over the Gulf of Mexico down in the Yucatan. And that's what's down here on the left. These are dew point temperatures, which of course is an indicator of how much water vapor is in the air. And you can see that just to our south here, as close as now, it looks like the line is up to about Fort Wayne, over towards the northwestern Indiana. These are 70-degree Fahrenheit dew points, which again, for us climatologically is up near the top of what we see. That is all moving northward, and we'll move into the state here later, the far southwestern corner here by late afternoon, and then over the rest of the state here during the evening hours. So we're going to see, we're going to experience something we don't see very often, but that is a true piece of tropical air, and it's already in the 80s in most places. We will top out in many areas in the low 90s, which will be right near record high, or if not record high temperatures for the day. But just as importantly, these dew point temperatures will move in. It's going to be really, really hot and uncomfortable. You'll notice it probably again by late afternoon in the south, and then spreading during the evening farther north from that. As those dew point temperatures go up, it'll be much, much more uncomfortable. The other thing you're going to notice here too, there are a lot of isobars in this map. The winds are going to gradually pick up. They're out of the southeast here today, and they will gradually increase during the late afternoon. And certainly this evening, it will be very windy, especially the western part of the state. And we should see southeasterly winds somewhere in the 15 to 25 mile per hour range. There are still, at this point in time, midday, there are still sustained 30 mile per hour winds with this, which now a tropical depression. But again, it's going to move basically north and northeast over the Quad Cities towards Madison and then up towards Marquette by tomorrow. And so here's the weather map for tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. You can see there's a little bit of consolidation that's gone on. Up here near Marquette, or just north of Marquette in Lake Superior, that is the center of what was Cristobal. And down below it to the south, here is the second system, which is now, again, approaching the Quad Cities area. This is the leading edge of some much, much colder air out of Canada. You can see the warm front has made it all the way to Ontario. These are features we just don't see very, very often during the summertime. This is something, again, you would expect in winter or the cold season. On the lower left here, I'm looking at surface temperatures as of tomorrow afternoon relative to normal. And you can see in Michigan, we're still much above normal. And you can clearly see where that frontal boundary is here. By that time, just approaching Chicago, much colder air just to the west of that. That's all headed our way for later on, late tomorrow, Wednesday, and into Thursday is when that cold air will finally get here. But I mentioned in terms of precipitation here, let me go back one more time. We do have the first round of precipitation with Cristobal. That will be here by probably early evening in far southwestern parts of the state. On the radar map, that's this area down here now, down in the lower Ohio Valley. That will approach late in the day and then overspread much of the rest of the lower peninsula in the overnight hours, the evening into the early morning hours. Best chances for precipitation with this, probably across the western lower peninsula. There could be some briefly heavy rains. Most of these storms are going to be moving from south to north fairly quickly, though. So I guess the good news is that they won't stay in any one place very long, but we could see a real quick quarter to half an inch. It is also possible, given all of the moisture and water vapor and the warm temperatures, A couple of these might reach severe limits. There might even be a tornado spin up is possible. I think most of that will stay to our south and west. I'll talk more about that in just a second. So the first major chance for precipitation here in the next day or two is tonight, overnight into the early morning hours. And then tomorrow we'll have another, probably a better chance for precipitation, especially in eastern areas of the state. And that's the secondary weather disturbance. It's the upper air trough as it moves through. So we'll see showers and thunderstorms redevelop during the day, probably by the middle of the day, early afternoon across western lower Michigan, and then spread to the east. I would be, we'll also likely see it form into a line by late in the day and into the early evening. There will be, I think, a higher risk of severe weather with this one. I wouldn't be surprised for the southeastern part of the lower peninsula to actually see maybe a watch go up. That one you have to keep an eye on. There could be tornadoes with that, especially across, again, the southeastern part of the state before this cold front then begins to move through the state by overnight into early Thursday. I mentioned severe weather. This is the severe weather outlook from Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma. They have the slight risk here, which is an elevated risk, mostly to our south, but probably up into southwestern portions of lower Michigan. And then again, tomorrow, Wednesday, I mentioned that southeastern. I think this is a pretty good, I agree with this. Pretty much that southeastern quarter of the state will have the highest risk of seeing severe weather. By Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, you can see everything is consolidated into one feature. Again, an unusually strong low pressure system for June, for the summer period, something we just don't see very often. But we're under a fairly strong northwesterly flow and much cooler weather. And while we have highs in the low 90s here today will be the warmest day of the upcoming week. We'll be a few degrees cooler than that tomorrow, mainly due to clouds. But by Thursday, most areas remaining in the 60s to low 70s for highs. So a full 20-degree cool off. And then that sets the stage for a very, very unusually cool, fair, and dry Friday into the weekend, probably into the early part of next week as well, with highs falling back into the 60s, low 70s, and lows generally in the 40s to low 50s. So much back to cooler than normal and much, much cooler than it is currently. There will be some lingering showers, at least in terms of precipitation, some light, mostly light rain lingering during the morning on Thursday before things dry off from west to east during the afternoon. It will also be, as the case later today and tomorrow, it'll be a windy day. But we'll see our winds shift around from the southeast today to the south here overnight tonight, and then finally to the southwest tomorrow, and around to the west and northwest then by Thursday. So you'll see that as this system goes through, the winds will shift. And given the high lake levels, if you're anywhere close to the lake, there will be, and given the record high levels for especially Lake Michigan, there will be flooding very likely along the lake shores given the strong west and northwest winds, unfortunately. Another hazard associated with this kind of weather. Looking at the rain gauge, potential rainfall totals mostly in the 1/2 to 1 inch category for the upcoming week. Almost all of this, and well, virtually it is all of the precipitation you see here is forecast to fall by Thursday morning. There's none forecast after that through next Tuesday. So again, this is all short term. Highest totals across western portions of the state, or highest threat, and then up into the UP. And I would note here that the center of this of Cristobal, what's left of it is a depression, is actually going to move through the western UP. So you can see they're closer to some of the heaviest totals. There might be some places that pick up 2, 3, even 4 inches of rain. Most of that is, though, confined to our west, closer to the track of that. And another thing to note is that you can see the totals do taper off and decrease as one goes east across the state. And of course, that southeastern corner that's been missed, you'd have to say is at the highest risk of seeing less precipitation, or at least where they could actually use the water here. They may be left out or have lower amounts here before all is said and done on Thursday. Into the medium range for guidance here, both the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks are suggesting a de-amplification of the jet stream. That is more west to east or zonal flow across North America. That typically moderates things in terms of temperature. And you can see that while we are expecting below normal or cooler than normal temperatures here this weekend into early next week, probably start to see moderation by Tuesday or Wednesday of next week back to normal levels. That's what's on the top here, the forecast. The other message in the forecast is that after a couple major chances for precip here over the next 2 days, that we are moving into a drier, at least temporarily, into a drier than normal pattern. Both 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day are calling for below normal, and that's here in the lower right. Not just Michigan, but that's pretty much consistent over all of the upper Midwest and Great Lakes region. So that's one consistency in the outlooks. So summarizing here, what a forecast. Lots of things to talk about. Hot, humid, and increasingly windy as the remnants of Cristobal move to our west up through Wisconsin. And 2 bouts of showers and thunderstorms, one later today, tonight, and into the overnight hours, and then another again tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening. Those are the 2, I think, largest threats. We will see much above normal temperatures for the next 2 days, but then after the frontal passage early Thursday, we'll see temperatures crash down about 20 degrees for the remainder of the work week and into the weekend, with fair, dry, and cooler than normal weather then. For the medium range, as you just saw, look for moderation next week. Still drier than normal, but with temperatures gradually moderating back up to near normal levels by the middle of the week. So with that, I'll wrap up a very, very full forecast here, and there was a lot to talk about, and hopefully next week will be a little less eventful.
Thanks, Jeff. One thing that certainly caught my attention, I think you described it as a Cristobal or whatever, the tropical depression being centered over Marquette tomorrow morning, I believe.
Yeah, and it does even better than that. I mentioned that historically, this has rarely happened, where we've had one of these remnants. Of course, we don't have, fortunately, we don't have hurricanes make it this far inland from their tropical moisture sources, but it might be the first time, at least in recorded history, that the remnant of a tropical cyclone has made it to Marquette. It's going to be into Ontario and all the way up to James Bay on Hudson Bay here by Wednesday. That's also probably has not, at least not in our recorded history, has happened. So very, very unusual or abnormal type of thing to see. But once in a while, we do see these storms, and the biggest impact here in the Great Lakes typically is some heavy rain for somebody, and that's likely what we'll see from Cristobal too.
Yeah. Well, just another thing to mark on the calendar for 2020. It's certainly been an unusual year. We all know that.
It is. And one last thing I didn't mention, but it is probably just worth noting. Since we are getting a visit from a tropical air mass, many times these disturbances move spores and other vectors of sometimes of both disease and sometimes insects move with these weather systems. That would be something to keep an eye on. So there might be material in there that we typically don't see in the Great Lakes that does travel based on the transport in the lower part of the atmosphere. Just something to keep a watch on.
That's interesting. Hopefully it doesn't bring any more mosquitoes with
it. We're already fine, I think, for those. So I hope you're right.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.